afternoon. My name's Philip and I'm the Library Manager at Salisbury Library, and welcome to Tea and Chat. And as you may know, we've been having a couple of Tea and Chat sessions through the month, and we've had a couple to celebrate Local History Month, and I've got some local history poetry and prose for you and some stories to share with you. So I hope you'll enjoy them. I've got extracts from a recording that I did with one of the Salisbury borrowers who tells us about his childhood exploits in what is now the library, where he went to see the wrestling. I've got St Martin's Junior School publication called The Cloak, which ran from 1952 to 1977 as a fascinating yearbook. We've got a few other little things that I think you might like, including the Children's Peace Pageant at Salisbury. So I thought we'd start with a recording that I did with one of our borrowers, a very nice gentleman called Gordon Peters. And we did this a number of years ago, and he was telling us about what was on the site of the library before the library was there. And of course the library was the market hall run by Salisbury Railway and Market House Company originally, and this is before the library was there in the early part of the 20th century, and it was a hall for hire for sporting events and exhibitions and things like dry storage. And Mr. Peters went there to see the wrestling, of which more in a minute, but he did tell us about the area around the library in the 1950s, 1960s when he was a child. And this brought up lots of other comments on social media about what was in the library building before the library, including module engineering exhibitions, trade exhibitions, cat shows. Someone said that during World War II there was a fun fair there. Someone said they played badminton there in the late 1960s. And also that they went to the wrestling, which is what Gordon went to see. And he came to the library to see the wrestling when he was about 10, he told us, and he went with his dad. And he helped his dad on the cattle market in the central car park, which is where the central car park was now, in 1959-60. And he was also mentioning about the fact that the ripples on the car park were there to help to, swash away all the muck and detritus after the cattle had been there. So anyway, he said he came along to see the wrestling every other Saturday morning, and this was on a Saturday morning in the market hall, as the library was, and there was a glass ceiling all the way along the building, and there were galleries on one side, on the right hand side. So if you walk into the library, there are galleries on the right hand side above the library. And in these galleries there was furniture stored, because there was a department store next door, so there were sofas in this furniture, and so that was what was there at the time. And he said that he came along with his dad, and on the Saturday evening to come to the wrestling. And sometimes the wrestlers used to sit on settees, and the settees were around the galleries at the top of the library. And so you could go to the department store next door and buy a sofa that might have been sat upon by one of the wrestlers. So he came along as a boy with his dad, and he saw lots of famous wrestlers, and one of his favourite ones was Randolph Turpin, who was a boxing champion who turned to wrestling. And when I was interviewing him, I asked him, because my memories of wrestling were like from the 70s on TV in the Saturday afternoon, and I asked him, was it a bit like that? Was it, a bit of a showman's thing? And he said, yes, it was very much a fun showman environment, and there was a real atmosphere, and there was, a lot going on. There was old women with handbags getting very excited, and he said they brought along grapes and were shouting and screaming and all that sort of thing. And he said he really enjoyed it. And it was a really family day out. And he said it happened every fortnight on a Saturday evening, and he used to queue. So you know where Market Walk is? He used to queue in Market Walk and pay his, I think he said it was sixpence to get into the wrestling. And the ring was roughly in the centre of the library, where the main display unit is now. And the balcony with the sofas on, where the wrestlers used to sit to come down, that was on the right-hand side above the children's library. So if you can imagine where the library is now, there was a wrestling ring in the middle, and the box office for the to get into the arena, as it were, was roughly where the portico is now. So he used to queue up at the box office with his dad as a little boy and come in and watch the wrestling on a Saturday night. And as he said, it was a real family day out. And there were the wrestlers had different names, like there was the Riot Squad, there was the House Angels, he said, the Royce Brothers, and he said his favourite one was the Wild Man of Borneo, and he was called that because he had so much hair it completely covered his face. So it was obviously a real entertainment, and he said it was all partly staged as it was on TV in the 70s. And he said that one wrestler came in once with a plaster over his eye, and the other wrestler made a big thing about ripping his plaster off his eye at the start of the fight, so the other wrestler got really angry, and of course it really got the crowd going. So, and he was telling me about all the different, moves the wrestlers did, and he used to give them a mule and a pile driver and all those things you might have seen when you were younger on television on a Saturday afternoon, when those wrestlers like Big Daddy and Giant Haystacks on. He said it was just like that, but this took place in the Market Hall where the library is now. And he came every other Saturday night, and there was the same people in the place. It was like the football now, the same people, the same seats, the same gang. And he said he really enjoyed it. And he also said that you had a programme with a lucky number on it, and his lucky number was 222. And if you were the lucky number in that programme, you won a box of a milk tray, so something worth having. Anyway, he picked up his programme one day, and he had his number, and his number came up, and he was really excited that he won a box of milk tray. But when he went up to put his hand up to go and get it, loads of other people had also had the same number, and there was a misprint on the programme, so he didn't get his box of milk tray, which I felt a bit sorry for him. So after he kindly gave this conversation, I gave him a box of milk tray to make up for his lack of chocolates all those years ago. And this took place, this wrestling in where the library is now, this took place between 1959 and he was there he said between 1959 and 1963. As I say, he was a small boy of 10, and it happened every other Saturday night. And the reason I loved doing this interview with him was it was so interesting hearing about him reminiscing about this and about what went on where we now pick up our books for the library. So I thought I wanted to share this recording with you, and we are going to keep this recording, and it's going to go to the History Centre because it was such a great snapshot of what was going on in the city around that time. So I'd like to thank Gordon Peters for that interview, and I thought you would be interested, and I'll tell you a little bit about it. So that was what went on in Salisbury in the early 60s. Now I've got a programme here. It's called the Cloak, and this is St Martin's Junior School brochure, and it was a souvenir booklet, and it was published in 1977. And obviously it was to celebrate the Silver Jubilee, and it's a history of St Martin's School. And it's also got some poems from the children, which I'll read you in a minute. But it's also got lots of vignettes and things that happened to the children while they were at school. So if I tell you a little bit about life at St Martin's School, and this is in the early part of the 20th century. And so they write, pupil teachers were taken on at first of all as candidates in order to prove their suitability. This was at the age of 14 years. They then taught a class of young children and were instructed by their headmaster in the technique of teaching. Academic studies too were part of that course. Instruction from the headmaster began at 7 o'clock in the morning during the summer months. At the end of a 4-year course, they either obtained a post as assistant teacher or proceeded to a teacher training college. Absenteeism of pupils was carefully questioned and the reasons recorded in the logbook. We find that outbreaks of measles, whooping cough, influenza, scarlet fever and other illnesses often drastically reduced attendances. Severe weather was another factor which affected attendance. Sometimes children could not attend because of sore feet. Half holidays were given for the Salisbury Fair and the visit of a circus or other attraction where attendance would have been less anyway. Even so, the frequent visits of the Wiltshire Yeomanry to Salisbury proved too great an attraction for many boys, as did the Wilton Sheep Fair held in September and May and the Salisbury races. Truancy followed and was severely dealt with. Farming operations involved many boys and kept them from school. Gardening in the spring, corn harvesting during the summer months. Often too they had to mind the house or young children while mothers were working in the fields. The ancient custom of flower gardening on May the 1st kept many from school, though more particularly this applied to girls. So as you can see, there are lots of excuses and distractions for not going to school. Obviously education was nowhere near the priority it is now, and this was before the First World War. So I thought that was fascinating. And the other thing about this this lovely little brochure from 1977 is it's got lots of extracts from the school logs from different times, so I thought I might share some of these with you. So this is from the St Martin's, as it was a boys' school then, logbook, and this is from the 24th of April 1875. Father broke down door of school at 12:15 to take home his son who'd been kept in. And on the 21st of July 1876, a bit of a tragedy. 2 children were killed and 8 injured by a runaway horse in land leading into Milford Street. The children were from the infant school. You wouldn't think a runaway horse could do so much damage, but of course horses are quite dangerous, aren't they, sometimes? And then if we jump forward, so we come to the war. So the 28th of June 1940, trenches have been dug at Shady Bower at the school field, and to these the boys would go in event of an air raid. And on the 18th of October 1943, it's recorded there was a gas mask inspection. And then we come forward to 1963, 26th of February. Now let's go to the 17th of Jan. So they reopened after receiving 10 tonnes of fuel, 51 scholars and 6 teachers were present. Then on the 26th of February, for the first time since December the 20th, the children were able to use the playgrounds, which are partially covered with ice. And then if you think this spring and winter's been hard, the 4th of March 1963, the ice and snow have now been cleared from both playgrounds, but there is no thaw. Work in the school garden cannot begin. It is impossible to dig the ground. It's quite a hard spring, I feel. So let's jump ahead to 1973, modern technology now, 16th of October. 4 children have taken part in a computer fair at the College of Sarum St Michael. That was in 1973. And then in 1975, the 19th of December, school closed today for the Christmas holidays, which will be a week longer than usual to effect some fuel savings. So obviously just as during the troubles in the 1970s. And we go to the Free School and George Herbert Boys' School logbooks, and this is back again to 1873. May the 1st, many of the children absent going about with garlands. And on the 25th of July, numbers decreased, parents working in fields and boys wanted to take charge of the house and infants. And then on the 12th of September, many children still absent, gleaning. That's gleaning the crops, I think, in the field. 1903, 10th of July, several boys went to the races, punished by no recreation in the playground for 2 months. So as you can see, I think this is a fascinating reference of all the things that went on in throughout history. And again, if we jump to the war, 27th of June 1940, Mr. G from the Ministry of Information, I like the fact he's Mr. G, gave a talk on the dangers of idle talk. And then on the 13th of August, sirens sounded for the first daylight air raid warning in Salisbury at 4 p.m. Children taken to the trenches until the all clear at 5:20 p.m. So as you can see, there was a lot. There's a lot of. It's like a different world, isn't it? Really. Now the other thing about this brochure is that it has a whole list of the children who were at St Martin's School in June 1977. And if you look through the list, this has some names that are recognisable now as people who still live in Salisbury and as Salisbury names. And indeed, one of them is a member of our staff and her brother. So we know it's a genuine list and we know it's accurate. So that was interesting, and the member of staff was thrilled to see that. But there are also some poems. So I thought I'd share you some childhood poems that were written for this brochure. So the first one is by Jenny Plowley, and she's aged 8, and it's called The Queen. It says, "The Queen watches television and the servants come along and give her dinner and the Queen washes up. I would like to buy the Queen a rabbit, and if I was the Queen, I would put my dress on and my earrings." So obviously Jenny's got her view of what the Queen does and does not do. And then Beverly Greaves, she's 8 as well, and she writes about the Queen. She says, "The Queen does lots of things. She goes in the royal garden and looks at her flowers. She goes in the royal kitchen to see how the royal cooks are getting on. She is beautiful. I like all the jewels best. If I had a lot of money, I would pay for her to have her ears pierced, and I would buy her some gold earrings. If I was the Queen, I would be very kind to the people who came to me. I would give them food and jewels. If they were children, I would take them and their mums and daddies out to London Zoo." So Beverly there, who was 8 at the time in 1977, has got it all worked out about what she'd do if she was the Queen. So we've also got, what else we've got? There's some, oh yes, here we are, some nice little poems here. So there's one that's called At the Fair, and this is by Caroline Hull, who was 9 at the time. And she says, "I walked so joyfully into the crowd where everyone was laughing and shouting cheerfully. The music was so loud and gay, all the brightly coloured lights were shining. It was wonderful. I was at the fair. Children on the Noah's Ark waved to their parents as round they go. You could hear screeches from the ghost train, and people were shouting as they whizzed down the helter-skelter. There were bangs to be heard from the gun range. I was losing on most of the games, but having so much fun on the big wheel. Everybody was shouting and laughing, giggling and chatting, pushing and shoving. But what did it matter? They were so happy, and so was I, for I was at the fair." Isn't that lovely? Because, you know, that's a pleasure that, you know, doesn't change throughout the years. So there are quite a few poems in here, but there are also observations about Salisbury as I see it, and life in the year 2000. So obviously in 1977, that was a long time away. So here's Joanne Fox, and she was 11, and she's put, "Salisbury is mostly shops with small squashed houses and tiny gardens. The streets in Salisbury are crisscrossed like a game of noughts and crosses. Traffic roars along big roads. I pity the dogs. Most of them are grubby, nowhere much to go, and no clean smells, just petrol fumes and roaring lorries. I feel happier when I walk through the cathedral grounds or any old quiet place. When I find an old building, I wonder what stories it could tell me about things that have happened while it has stood where it does." And here's another poem from, or a piece of writing from Alan Davis, who's aged 11, and he's written, "Salisbury is like a huge museum of ancient and medieval things, houses and churches. It's surrounded by lots of historic places like Stonehenge, Avery Rings and Old Sarum. Inside the city we have the famous cathedral. Everything would be spoiled if Salisbury was modernised." A bit of a contentious point there at the end, but very interesting. It's lovely to see what the children think. And here is Greg Shepherd, who's aged 11, and he writes about life in the year 2000. And he says, "I think that the earth might be so crowded that we might have to move to the sea, and if that didn't work, we might have to put some of the people into cold storage and put them up into space until there was room for them back on Earth. Maybe there would be a jail on the moon for the very bad criminals." Well, there we are. I mean, it might be better than taking them to Melksham, perhaps, but obviously Greg has got his solution there for dealing with crime in Salisbury. So this booklet is in our reference library, but I did speak to St Martin's School and they gave me permission to read extracts from it, so I'm very grateful to them for that. So this is the Cloak, 1952 to 1977, from St Martin's Junior School, and I thought you would enjoy sharing some of that. And staying with the theme of children, we've got something else that I found in the local studies library, and we've had a massive stock check going on, so while we haven't been open quite so much, it's a chance to catch up on everything. And this was a children's peace pageant at Salisbury, and this is something that cost price £1, and this is extracts from the Salisbury and Winchester Journal, and you can see there's a picture there which I've put on the Facebook page. There's one of them, the Father Time, looking slightly frightening. And here's another one, going through the streets, the prologue car and the dim past, so you'll recognise Salisbury there. So this was about a peace pageant that took place in 1919, and as you can imagine, the paper reported it with some rather flowery language, so I thought I might share that with you. And it's called Salisbury Through the Ages. For the brain that conceived it, the hands that fashioned it, for the performers who carried it to a conclusion, the Salisbury Children's Peace Pageant on Monday, July the 28th, 1919 was a triumph. There is no room for a second opinion. Among the thousands of people who witnessed the city's first attempt at pageantry upon an ambitious scale, complete unanimity prevails, and what is even more convincing evidence of the success of this most striking feature of Salisbury's celebrations of peace, an appetite for more. Nothing upon this scale had ever been attempted within living memory. It took people by surprise. Regarded purely as a spectacular entertainment, the pageant was pleasing. To minds that delved beneath the surface, it was more than pleasing for its educational influence, its scholarly attention to detail, and for its scrupulous accuracy and completeness. Old Salisbury was reviewing itself from prehistoric days to Stuart times, and took pride in the retrospect of the dead for the benefit of the living. There were something over 4,000 children in the procession through the streets, and of these between 500 and 600 in costume, each of them representing a definite character in the history of the city. Monarchs, nobles, church dignitaries, monks, friars and nuns, great ladies and peasants, traders, soldiers, civilians, musicians and singers, hunters and hawkers, beggars and gypsies, Christians and Jews, a motley of the many who've helped greatly and humbly in making the history of the city, but a motley governed and ordered by a master hand to provide a series of pictures sharply defined. None must, however, convey but a faint idea of the work of preparation, superintended by Mr. Frank Stevens, master and author of the pageant. Mrs. Stevens, the mistress of the wardrobe, and carried through by masters and mistresses of the schools and other helpers with the enthusiastic cooperation of the children. The debt owing to the master of the children's pageant is universally recognised, and was perhaps best expressed in the little unrehearsed incident before the pictures in the park, when walking across the enclosure to his place on the stand, he and his wife, that's the master of the pageant, were greeted with a spontaneous burst of applause, a generous tribute to his labours. Every one of the dresses was made by designs taken from the master from authentic sources, old illustrations, Wilton House pictures, tombs in the cathedral, or the armour in the Tower of London, and so the pageant became educational in its details. Then again, the colouring of the pageant was ordered according to a carefully thought out plan. The least artistic among the spectators must have noticed there was no indiscriminate mixing of colours. Each epoch had its scheme, and as far as possible the colouring of the period was according to that of old illustrations. For instance, the group representing the presentation of the City Charter was mounted to the hue of pale roses and blue. The Saxon period resplendent in its barbaric colouring of strong blues, oranges and crimsons. Now, if you ever want to read more about this and look at some wonderful pictures, and this is from 1919, there's bits about Parliament at Salisbury, and the York and the Lancasters, Elizabeth at York at Salisbury. This is the Children's Peace Pageant at Salisbury, and it's in the reference library for you to look at. Okay, well, time has gone very fast, so I'll just quickly mention a few of the other things I was going to talk about. and I will read an extract from one of them. So one thing I was going to talk about was there's lots of debate again about having the Salisbury bypass, and one of the things we've got in the reference library, and as you won't be surprised, is a map of all the routes. But this is from the last, or one of the last consultations, and this is from the end of the 80s, 1988. And as you can see, there's a map of all the routes here, as they are now. There we go. I know it's reversed around the other way, but you'll be pleased to know there was a red route, a blue route, and a yellow route. And the yellow route went to the north of up via Camp Hill on the A360, where the new roundabout is, across round the back of Old Sarum, and across to St Thomas's Bridge, and then round between Cocky Down and Laverstock down to Peter's Finger. And the red route went to the west, just to the west of Bemerton Heath, and cut across between Bemerton Heath and Quidhampton, and across the Watermeadows round the back of Harnham Hill, and then across the Watermeadows again. And the blue route followed the railway all the way into Quidhampton, and then round at the back of Harnham Hill. So this was the three options, and all this has been gone through before. So we've probably got a bit more stuff about the Salisbury Bypass, so that's worth looking at as well. And all the same arguments and the same points, and the effect on people in the countryside, and the benefits and the disadvantages, all these are mentioned. So that was something that we found. And we also found a little bit about Salisbury, the city and its charters. And I was just going to read a little extract from this before, I think, finishing off with a poem from the children again. So this was written by Penelope Rundle, who worked at the Records Office in Wiltshire in the 60s and 70s. And I just thought I'd read you a little bit about the setting up of Salisbury. The bishop chose for his, the area now occupied by the city was known at the time as Old Salisbury, perhaps because the little settlements already there were more ancient than the borough. We speak of the cathedral as being moved from Old Sarum to Salisbury, but the citizens of 1220 would have said it was being moved from Salisbury to Old Salisbury, a fact which has caused some confusion to historians in the past. The bishop chose for his new city a place called Merrifield, that is the marshy land down by the river, which could only be used for rough grazing. He already had a house called New Place down by the Avon, presumably on the site of the later palace. On the empty land, an unusually spacious layout was possible, and it seems to have been complete by about 1300, so infilling with houses would have gone on for many years afterwards. A grid system was adopted, with the streets forming a series of hollow squares called chequers. At the same time as the city streets, the close was laid out with plots for the clergy houses. The bishop chose his site well. It sloped slightly from northwest to southeast, and this made it possible to divert the waters of the Avon near Castle Street and send them flowing in drainage channels through every street until they emerged in Bugmore, i.e. Boggymore, the meadows east of Exeter Street, and to the south of St Anne Street. So that will be where the friary is now. Drinking water was plentiful, and the site was sheltered by the downs. Along the top of the chalk ridges, a network of well-drained roads converged on the city. A good example is the Hare Path, which runs from Harnham Hill past the race plain to Shaftesbury. Now only a track, it was once an important main road at the time when the valley bottoms were too miry to traverse in winter. So Salisbury's position led to its early prosperity. A large market square was laid out, extending as far as the New Canal. The houses of Oatmeal Row, Oaks Row, Butcher Row and Fish Row only marked the site of early lines of stalls. Not far away lay the port of Southampton. It's not surprising that Salisbury prospered, and a little more than 100 years after its foundation, it was the 9th wealthiest provincial town in England. Such a rapidly expanded town needs a system of government from the start. It should not be forgotten it was founded by the bishop on his own land and did not gain total independence from him until the 17th century. The first charter actually given to the city was from the bishop himself in 1225. It gave the citizens a form of burgage tenure, that is to say, in return for an annual rate of 12 shillings, the owner of each pot was freed from all other demands and services to his overlord the bishop. In other words, the property was freehold, which added greatly to its value. In 1227, the first royal charter was granted by Henry III, and this founded the Tuesday market, which survives to this day. So again, a fascinating little booklet, and this one you can take out. It's Salisbury, the city and its charters. So I just thought I'd go back to the Cloak and the St Mark's Junior School. I thought we'd finish with a poem from one of the children. And I thought we'd finish with a poem from David Tutt, who was age 11, and he seemed to like mongooses at the time. So he's written a poem called Mongoose the Fearless, and it goes, "The snake falls asleep but can't close his eyes. He eats big animals twice his own size. His tongue flickers in and then flickers out, and his whole body moves as he wriggles about. The snake sees a movement behind a tree. He glides towards it to find out what it might be. His eyes begin to glow and his jaws go loose, but he finds it's his enemy, the fearless mongoose. The mongoose sees its favourite prey and moves towards his meal for today. The snake strikes first, but mongoose jumps clear and jumps on the snake, filling it with fear. The snake tries to escape from the powerful jaws, but the mongoose clings on with his terrible sharp claws. The mongoose bites harder on the snake's head. The snake falls down. The snake is dead." Well, David, age 11 in 1977, that's pretty definite, isn't it, about the snake and the mongoose? So I'd like to thank you for joining me today, and I hope you enjoyed the extracts I've read to you, and I'd particularly like to thank St Martin's Junior School for the extract from their newsletter, which we've got in the reference library. We'll be having more tea and chats in the following month. We're hoping to keep it up for the time being. So either Steph at Melksham, Basil at Trowbridge, or myself at Salisbury will do those, and we're having poetry and prose, and this will be every couple of weeks. So look out on our Facebook pages for that. In the meantime, I'll wish you a peaceful afternoon, and thank you for